Good evening, everybody. Has anyone not yet got their tomato soup? Yes, you're all nice and warmed up. Lovely. My pleasure. I wish I could say I made it, but I didn't. But I understand it's very good. Thank you. So nice to see you this evening. I think the subject matter goes to the very heart and core as to what is a human being. What kind of item of creation a human being is. What kind of species of existence. What kind of botanical category might it fall into. And we're going to explore it. And we're going to explore it not so much from a Western or psychological or philosophical point of view, as much as from a Jewish spiritual vantage point, whilst alluding to the contemporary knowledge at the same time. I really do enjoy an interactive session, so please feel free to raise your hands throughout and ask questions, and that way we'll have a nice Socratic dialogue rather than a monologue, because I have heard myself before. Of course, you know about the lady from Brooklyn who, in her advanced age of 70s, decided to make a pilgrimage to a Hindu group in India, had a real yen for this, saved all her pennies, finally was able to buy passage, and made the difficult journey across. Why suddenly to a particular guru of a particular grouping in India? We shall see. So she finds herself on the shores of India and then has to find her way to the particular arena in India where this particular grouping exists. It takes some weeks. It's not easy. Not well known at all. Finally, she makes her way there, finds the group and says, "I must speak to your leader." They say, "Really sorry, but he's currently on a 40-day meditation fast at the top of the mountain." She says, "Doesn't matter, I want to go there." That's not really possible because the mountain is quite formidable, and of course there's the 1,000 steps that you have to take to reach him. No, she's going to do it. So they give her 2 aids because they think that she may not be able to make it even a quarter of the way, but sprightly as she is, she does make her way there. And at the top of the mountain is a cave. She peers into the dark cave and makes out the silhouette of an individual, barely clad, long straggly hair. She goes up to him, taps him on the shoulder and says, "Sammy, come home." Which I think is the story of the Jewish people, is it not? In our own day and age. So many have to find their way to the Himalayas before they find their way back home. But that's all right. We all have circuitous journeys to our own goals, and every journey is valid. The reincarnative journey of a soul is multifarious through many lifetimes, through many pathways, and everyone has their own. Let's have a look at what these terms mean. Spiritual, emotional. I want to begin with a consideration of the lexicon of the language first. So there's some commonality. As I often say, if we were speaking in Hebrew, there'd be no problems. But the problem is we're speaking in English. And as a consequence, there's a lot of words. Like if I use the word mind, do I really mean intellect? Or do I mean intelligence? Or is it thought? Or is it consciousness? Psyche? Rationality? Cogitation? Would the real mind please stand up? What's the difference between them? And generally we use them interchangeably, without any exactitude. And the reason is because in the English language, they are, in many instances, interchangeable. They point to generally the same thing, but because they come from different historical language roots, they're different languages, in fact, whether it's Latin, Greek, classic languages, etc. So let's ask ourselves, Could someone tell me the difference between mind and intellect? Anybody offer a thought on that?
I would say the mind is something that exists. We're born with it. It's an unconscious, sometimes brought into the conscious. And an intellect is a conscious act that's introduced into the mind.
Good, thank you. So you've used the word mind, intellect, thought, and consciousness in the one definition. So if I were being a little bit more daring, I'd ask you then to separate all those and tell me, what the hell are you talking about? No, I'm kidding. But I really respect what you've said because it's quite a profound statement. But no, I don't understand. Now that I've frightened anyone else from volunteering, is there a difference between intellect and intelligence? Yes, but if I were to venture to ask what is it, that might be a bit more difficult. Suffice it to say that you will agree with me that clarity of distinctiveness of these terms doesn't really exist. And just depends the usage, the common usage, in what discipline as to whether you're utilizing one word or the other. In psychology, it'll be intelligence. In spirituality, not even Jewish spirituality, it tends to be mind. Consciousness sounds like something even more profound and deeper than that. And what does it mean to be rational, non-rational, irrational, super-rational, and super-rational? See the difficulty we have in communicating. And we're talking about the basis of our everyday activity being governed by these words, and we haven't got a clue how to distinguish them. That's because we're human beings. Yes?
Would it have something to do with the way these are employed? How you use
I have no doubt.
intelligence or
No
use
doubt.
your thoughts or your cognitive...
Absolutely, I agree with you fully. It's just that I don't think the distinction is rational. I think it's a usage-oriented, which doesn't draw any distinction. But if I were to ask you, please point to which part of the body these refer to, I'd think no one has any difficulties. Which part of the body? Yes, of course, everyone's pointing to their head. Even consciousness? Generally, people still point to their head, but you'd probably think twice about it. Now, if you found that a little bit challenging, the next one is even more so. Emotion, feelings, sensitivities, sensations, senses, mood, spirit. Could someone tell me the difference between emotions and feelings? No?
Well, usually emotion maybe would be more externally expressed than feelings. Yeah, like the internal, like in
That's a nice distinction. Emotions external, feelings internal. But what does an external emotion mean?
you're screaming at someone because you're angry.
In here you're angry? Or back to feelings? Doesn't matter. Same problem. It's in their usage. We aren't quite sure. But whereas I would be able to ask you the question, where does the first set of words occur in the body? If I asked you, where do the second set of words occur in the body? What would you point to? Figuratively or literally? Do you not have feelings in your hands? Some people have gut feelings, which some of us discussed in a previous lecture. Okay. Interesting. With the real feelings, please stand up. We're not through. Soul, consciousness, spirit, ghost, angel. What's the difference between soul and consciousness? If you can draw the distinction between those two, you're getting very close to the essence of what we're talking about. No?
Is soul an individual, like who you are, like a source of light and consciousness and collective?
Soul, individual, and consciousness, collective. Do you not have individual consciousness? What is consciousness? Anybody? Yes?
Isn't consciousness more like the process, the thought process, that you're connecting yourself with?
Very good. Excellent. Then tell me, what's the difference between consciousness and thought?
Well, thought, there can be a thought, but consciousness is like thought plus time or knowledge of time.
Thought plus, okay? It's like take thought plus. And, okay, all right, good. We're struggling. I struggle. Everyone struggles with these words. Problem is the stupid language called English, yes?
You might associate consciousness with awareness.
Rowan gives us a synonym. That's great. Then I'll still ask you, what's the difference between awareness and soul?
I'm not going to answer.
No, I didn't think you would, Rowan. Okay. All right. So that sets the scene. We have to evolve a language of discussion that's pragmatic. And in the course of this evening, I'll be utilizing Hebrew terms. Because one of the basic differences between Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh, and English is that Hebrew is the only theological or spiritual language in existence. And therefore we can actually speak about the nature of reality, whereas most languages are an evolution of terminologies that by community become a consensus. That doesn't help us. That just might explain the background. I'm giving you a few definitions for the purpose of tonight. You don't have to agree with these definitions, but it'll help us talk about it this evening. What is mind? The mind is the expression of the soul as it flows through the brain. Notice three terms: mind, soul, brain. First, let's distinguish easily mind and brain. Brain is the physiology. It's the piece of medical technology that has been implanted up here, which when utilized, what does it mean, utilized? So I'm saying a soul flowing through it. It expresses as a process called mind. Mind is a process. It's the end product when the neshama flows through the moach, through the brain. All right? For the purpose of our discussion. What is emotion? It's the expression of the same soul as it drives through the heart. What is the soul? The expression of God and the seat of consciousness. So in our literature, consciousness is not mind. Consciousness is much bigger than mind. Consciousness is the sum total of the neshama through all the organs of the body working cumulatively. The totality. All right, so we've got a little bit of clarity, a little bit is the emphasis, mind, emotion, and soul. Yes?
You've used the word brain and referred to that as an anatomical feature of
Correct.
the body. And physiology is actually the function, so anatomy is the organ. But how can you say that emotion is the expression of the soul that drives through the heart when the heart is just purely an anatomical organ of the body?
And the brain is also purely an anatomical part of the body.
But we know there's no electrical currents, there's no nerve impulses that run through the heart that actually...
Oh, there certainly are.
Well, there are to make the muscle move.
It's very, very profoundly electrical. Ask any of the surgeons who deal with it.
In order to make the heart pump like...
Well, that's what you say, but it's got many, many, many functions. But the interface between the physical world, in our discussion, and the spiritual world is not clear. Even if I were to ask you, oh, well, how does it go through the brain? Well, of course, it goes through the brain because there's electrostatics, there's chemistry, and the like, but what does that mean? In the heart, there's also electrostatics and chemistry, etc.
Not in the same way as the brain.
No, that's why it's called the heart. Same with the foot. Same with the ear. If we were to introduce hearing, and I were using this definition, I would say hearing is the process of the neshama interfacing with the anatomy of the ear. Same with the foot, etc., etc. I'm using for the purpose of our discussion, not asking you to accept it or disagree with it. I'm just saying that happens to be the Jewish spiritual teaching. You can go away and say, I heard the Jewish spiritual teaching. I really don't agree with it, but now I know it. That's great. That's fine. Then we've achieved something tonight. Yes.
So, what's the Hebrew word for mind and consciousness that you're referring to?
Mind is seichel. Brain is moach.
And consciousness?
Emotion is midot or midos. And heart is lev. There is no word for consciousness in our language. It's only neshama, soul. You don't have a further intermediary called consciousness. We know what it is. It's called neshama.
It's a much bigger term.
Yep. All right. What's building blocks so far? Building blocks, just evolving the idea. So, as we were just discussing, I was having this discussion, the soul in the body interrelationship is that the neshama, an energy source. If you want some sort of way of dealing with it, it's an energy source. The word energy is simply a convenient use of term in contemporary literature, especially spiritual literature. Everything's energy. You've got energy healing, you've got energy between particles, you've got energy in all sorts of ways. They mean very different things, but it's like a convenient term because the word energy is sufficiently abstract to be able to cover many bases. So we use it as a model. But it really has many distinctive aspects if we really analyze it. So if you're uncomfortable with the word soul because it's antiquated or old worldly or what have you, you have a bias against it, just substitute it by any other word that you wish. I have no problems with that. But something comes from something, because when the person dies, they still have a heart, and they still have a brain, and they still have an ear, and they're not functioning. Why? Oh, that's the model we use. But I'm interested in people who don't use that model, how they'll explain what death is. Think about it, all right? There are 613 parts of the body in one way in which we look at the anatomy of the body. This is using Maimonides' definition. Maimonides, you might recall, was one of the great pre-Renaissance individuals. He was a physician to the court of the Caliph. He was a philosopher par excellence. His Guide for the Perplexed is well read elsewhere, and especially in other literatures as well. He was also the greatest codifier of Jewish law in history. So that's just one particular rendition. It coincides obviously with 613 mitzvot. What's a mitzvah? Using the word pragmatically, not in religious terms per se. Mitzvot are the channels through which the soul operates through the guf, the body. 613 anatomical parts, 613 spiritual channels, and consequence of the way that we behave in the world is to accomplish an ideal flow of these 613 channels. The word mitzvah means connection. Tzavta is the Aramaic antecedent of the word. 613 connections with the world. Okay? When does soul and body come together? When can you start speaking about soul and body? Answer, at the point of conception. At the very point of conception, a miracle occurs, which is not well understood in any even most contemporary literature of science. Whatever it is that takes place from a theological point of view is the beginnings of body and soul together, which means that in Jewish legalistic terminology, at that point something very valuable has come into existence and therefore should never be destroyed. On the other hand, if there are compelling reasons for, God forbid, destroying it, for example, health of the mother, which may be dangerously ill as a consequence of that, then you may do so. These are exceptional circumstances. But something valuable has taken place. There has come into being a flow of neshama. That neshama, by the way, is not a baby neshama at the point of conception. It's a total neshama, totally mature, totally adult. Neshamas are always adult, even before they become conceived. Your soul exists beforehand. The soul was created at the beginning of creation, yours was, and it comes back for more and more attempts to get it right throughout many lifetimes. Okay? What's the name of the book? past lives, past masters? What is it? Come on. Wise's book? No one knows it? Okay, not to worry. What is it? It's many lives, many masters. Do I have another? Okay. Yes?
Isn't it 40-something days after conception?
No, 40 days after conception, if you to use something which you would understand, it comes from Makif to Mamala. I'm talking to this guy, not to anyone else at the moment. So there's a gradual physicalization of internalization, but that's getting too subtle for our discussion here. Okay, and then we have a very strange thing sometimes. I just brought it in arbitrarily because it does help us understand what the near-death phenomenon is, which people have experienced, not many, relatively. It's written about. It seems to be very, very clearly a real phenomenon, near-death phenomenon. Body and soul become separated, and the soul is able to recognize itself in the operating theatre. The body's down there, the soul's somewhere near the ceiling. Read about these phenomena? There are many, many such things, and a number of scientists have written about this as well, which means that there are two elements we're talking about: spiritual consciousness, if you will, and consciousness in the real world of time and space, which is not really the real world. It's really, as we'll soon see, a very, very derivative world that we live in. This discussion so far has been just to get the language and the concepts into place so we can move a little bit further. Do you have a question there? You nearly bought a house if you raised your hand like that. Okay. The soul's journey. So let me now move with the model further. I do know the topic of tonight. I'm not avoiding it, and I will get there, okay? How does the neshama operate in context of the world of time and space? How does it get there? How does it become conceived? Where is it prior to conception? So what we can see here is 4 primary parallel realms. Some call them parallel worlds. Doesn't matter. Asiya, Yetzirah, Bria, and Atzilus. This world up here is Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. This is just the model. And by the way, the Kabbalists warned against the use of models so that people don't actually take this literally. So this is just a pedagogical term. You cannot move from here to here by flying high in the sky. It just doesn't happen. This is the only realm of time and space, conveniently in red. And if you want to know why it's in red, I just wanted to contrast the color. There's no reason, all right? This world, Yetzirah, has no time and space at all. This one up here, Bria, also has no time and space, but makes this one here look absolutely physical by comparison. And the one up here, Atzilus, makes Bria look absolutely concrete. So each one is a quantum leap removed from the other. The Ein Sof, which is in Hebrew without end or infinity, is simply a metaphor for God. The Ein Sof is the source of everything. The Ein Sof radiates a soul. The soul transcends through these various realms and ultimately finds itself here in your body. That's the process. I'm just giving you a simplistic picture of what takes place. Okay? So when you die, please God, everyone in this room should live to 120 and beyond. All that happens is this little arrow stops reaching the red area and stops at the yellow one. You're still here, you're still here, you're still here. You just don't happen to be down here, which frees you up. You have much greater appreciation of everything. You have a much wider vista of reality. You're no longer in body. You don't have body constraints. You don't have any constraints whatsoever in context of that. Some people can experience that on rare occasions, as we said before, the near-death phenomenon and the like. Okay? So that's what happens when a person dies. But all that means is that the neshama recedes from this arena and continues to exist until once again it comes back again. But as we'll see later, it comes back again with a different body, with a different parent, different modeling, different genetic makeup, different environmental processing, in fact, therefore, a different personality. And also because, very conveniently, your previous life has been screened off. Most of us don't remember that. It's a real test. And that's what the purpose is. We don't know the test. Having said that, let me just complicate this a fraction further. Here again, you're going to have the, oops, sorry, David. You're going to have here the various, it's okay? I just pulled every one of your cords out, and miraculously, of course, I made this still work, so it's great. I don't know where this one belongs, but now you know it's not necessary.
No, that's all right.
It's okay?
Oh, this is, yeah.
No, I don't need it.
I
I don't
need
need
this.
it. No.
That's all right.
So, thanks, David. It's lovely to learn when we're redundant. This really makes it, see? There we are. Humility, absolute humility. All right, so you've got the four realms, Asiya, Yetzirah, Bria, and Atzilus. And you've got the Ein Sof. But this time, what we have is 10 radii emanating from the Ein Sof, all interfacing with the four realms. What are these 10 radii? They're 10 separate energies, using the word energy again, just as a matter of convenience. If I were to use Hebrew lexicon, I'll call them oiros, lights. I might call them sephirot, which is distinctive features. There's a lot of terminologies. Okay. 3 of these, 1, 2, 3, which are in orange there, ultimately, as they transcend through all these down to Asiya, become expressed down here as mind. Mind means 3 spiritual energies coagulating in context of our body and anatomical parts. The other 7, as they transcend through these realms or refract spiritually through these realms, become emotion, or seichel and midos in the original language. So you have a flow of these 10 down to here. When we speak of these 10 as a unit, it becomes this white arrow. They are all inside that white arrow, and they become called the soul. So the neshama, the soul, is an amalgam, if you will, putting it simplistically, it is much more complex than that, but for our purposes, of these 10 flowing through the realms and ultimately finding their way, so to speak, into our bodies. And not just the bodies of human beings, but the bodies of the animal kingdom, the bodies of the vegetational kingdom, and the bodies of the inanimate world. Everything possesses spiritual energies to maintain their existence. In our teachings, a stone cannot be a stone unless there is a spiritual force that ultimately makes up, in physical terms, the van der Waals forces of molecular structure that ultimately give the shape and the form of the stone. Not only that, but in our teachings, even the inanimate world possesses some sentiency, a level of consciousness. The vegetational kingdom, even more so. Animal kingdom more so, till you get to the human. Everything possesses a level of, I'm using the word consciousness advisedly here, consciousness. Everything possesses absolute value. In Jewish teachings, you're not allowed to destroy anything in existence. Everything is valuable. You can't wantonly destroy anything. Famous story of the Friedrich Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, as a young man was walking with his father, the Rebbe Rashab, in a forest discussing profound philosophical teachings, and the young man idly just picked a leaf from the tree. And his father stopped and said, "Do you realize what you've just done? You've taken the life of that leaf." You can't wantonly destroy anything. You can elevate, that's another discussion, but you can't do it simply for one's egotistical needs per se. We won't talk today about the integration of the soul and the body of the other three areas, realms of existence. We're talking in terms of human terms tonight.
I haven't seen those terms Atsiluria and Yetzirah before.
There's a first time for everything.
Could you just explain how you understand each of those terms?
No. Only for lack of time. I can only use a quick shorthand. Yetzirah is the spiritual form of all matter. Matter, spiritual form, the creative source. The beginning of the Bible, when it says, and God created the heaven, that's talking only from this point onwards. It's not even talking about that, which pre-existed. Atzilus is when there's no separate item in existence. Everything is one amorphous spiritual blob, if you will. Okay? So that's kind of distinctive features. Let's talk about now mind, because that's the subject of our discussion. If we're going to be speaking tonight in terms of emotional intelligence, the word intelligence has a connotation of mind involvement, albeit it's not the same word as mind. What is the mind? The mind, we said, is, I'll revise, the way that the neshama intersects with the physical brain, resulting in a process which is called mind. Mind is the result of that interaction. But it itself is not so simple. We just said there were three primary flows in the previous slide that make up the brain. They happen to be called Chochmah, Bina, and Da'at. And they have functional differences. The way that the neshama, the soul, integrates through the brain is through three distinct processes. One of them is a creative process, your creative self, which is called the Chochmah element. I'll speak about that in a moment. Then you have the Bina process, which is developmental mind activity. And then you have Da'at, which is the conclusive, the end of the process, reaching a specific goal. Chochmah, being creative, tends to be associated in our more recent literature with right brain activity, our creative, intuitive self. Bina, the left brain, analytical and systematic. And Da'at, the middle brain, integrative and focused. So we have, as those of you who've been attending my mindfulness course, you will remember that we made the dichotomy between non-linear mind activity and highly focused mind activity. Non-linear activity was the creative aspect of it, and we identified physiologically which part of the brain tends to operate in terms of that, and we did so in terms of the focused activity, which tends to operate through the frontal cortex, whereas the non-linear tends to operate through the totality of the brain and not one specific arena. So there are ways in which our physiological brain actually today can be identified as corresponding to these because of our development in technology of being able to look in and peer into the brain through scanning technologies and the like. So, but we've got the literature which tells us of these three processes. You are always utilizing these three. You can't begin to think anything whatsoever. You can't have a thought. Thought and mind. What's the difference between thought and mind? I'm not going to go into it, but see, there's a real difference. Mind is already a big process. Thought is one small feature of it. You can't have a thought unless you conjure it up, unless you're a magician. You must pull it out of the hat. There's not going to be a thought unless you somehow get that thought popping into the head. It doesn't just pop into the head. Your Chochmah mechanism pops it into your head. People feeling warm? Yes. David, maybe just have a look if the air conditioning's gone off or something. Thanks. It doesn't just pop into your head. You popped it into the head. You used your Chochmah mechanism, the word Chochmah, which in contemporary Hebrew is called wisdom, but we're using it here in a specific psycho-spiritual system language. Chochmah comes from the words koach, the potential of anything, the potential of bringing into being something which has been subconscious, if you will, to use the contemporary language. That's what Chokhmah does. It pops it across the boundary of subconsciousness to consciousness. Why some people pop it this way and you're creative in this way, and why other people pop it that way and you become creative that way, and why some people are not particularly creative at all because they're not good at popping things from subconscious to conscious, which doesn't mean that they're inadequate. Their strength may be the second one, Bina. What's Bina? Bina is already, it's popped into your head. What do you do with it? That's called analysis. It's called broadening, lengthening the concept. It's looking at it profoundly. It's analytical. Some people are much better in that than Chokhmah. They're Bina-oriented. They're engineers rather than architects. Okay? Whatever it might be. They're terrific in taking something that exists and moving it to the next stage. We need those people a lot. Then you've got the artists who are really good on the first place, the Chokhmah creative process. Then you've got third kinds of people who, they're more da'at oriented. They can take everything that's been put out there and make it into something real in the world. They're much more conclusive. The truth is, of course, we have all three. All three, every one of us, but in different quanta, which makes each one of us in the room different. There are no two people in this room, let alone two people in the world, who have the same ratio of Chokhmah, Bina, and Da'at. Individuality, differentness. But we're human beings, Homo sapiens, we have this particular process. I won't right now go into the rather fascinating consideration, what do animals have, and what do flowers have, and what do stones have. But they also have elements of this as well. But their form, or their outer casing, their body, is not as flexible as a human body, so stones tend not to speak to you. And if you do hear a stone speaking to you, see me afterwards. Okay? Yes?
I saw that Chokhmah and Bina are primary saccharods, but Das is a product of interaction between those two. It's not a primary one.
Okay. Yes and no. That gives you a good answer. Da'at appears to be an integration of Chokhmah and Bina. Chokhmah is masculine, Bina is feminine, Da'at is child. That's another way that Kabbalah looks at it. But the truth of the matter is that each one is a separate flow, but Da'at doesn't begin to flow until Chokhmah and Bina have actually begun. Okay? But that's a good question, and we would spend a long time just on your question. Now let's get to emotion. We said there are 7 specific flows of emotion. So once again, Kabbalah and Chassidus are very pragmatic. By the way, I've just used 2 terms which need a little bit of explication. Kabbalah and Chassidut, or Kabbalah and Chassidus, colloquially spoken. Kabbalah is the 4th level of the depth of the Torah. When we were all met for the first time, you remember? It was Mount Sinai. You've forgotten? Short-term memory, I know. When we were all there, and Moshe Rabbeinu taught us the Torah, which he had a 40-day tutorial on the top of the mountain. No, that wasn't who she was looking for at the top of the mountain. But he came down, and he taught it at 4 distinct levels, which are known as Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod, each one of increasing depth, not for now. The deepest one, the 4th one, became known as Kabbalah. Okay, what's Chassidut? Chassidut is taking the cryptic teachings of Kabbalah and making them intelligible. Because if you were to open books of Kabbalah by yourself, if I were to open up by myself, we would not really understand. It either appear super simple, so we're missing a lot, or super complex, and we'd never get anywhere. So Chassidut takes Kabbalah and makes it explicable, amongst other things. These 7 sefirot, as we call them in a previous slide, of emotion are called Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. To show you an idea of their differentiation, let me just take the first 2 tonight, not all 7, because that will take us the whole evening also. Chesed is that emotional tendency which flows outward from self, like this. Anything which flows outward is chesed-oriented. Sharing, giving, love. Gevura is anything which does this. Retention, holding in, narrow focus. So we have two primary emotional tendencies. One is a chesed tendency, and the other one is a gevura tendency. The other 5 become subsets of the interplay of these two. So I won't necessarily go into them right now. I'll just give it just a quick summary in a moment. Every one of our emotions can be analysed in context of this and that, whether we reveal ourselves or hide ourselves, and all the degrees between. So in a conversation, to what extent you actually share of yourself in the conversation, to what extent you think it's appropriate not to share of yourself. There's no right and wrong here. This is no more right than that. It's only an issue of what makes sense in the moment, what is appropriate in the moment. See, if you meet the person for the first time at a party and in the space of 60 seconds she or he has shared all the intimate moments of their life, you know it's not terribly appropriate. Very chesed-oriented, very giving, very sharing, and very inappropriate. And then there's another person who you have known all your life and know nothing about them. Closed. Okay, and the variations in between. Everything emotionally is a product of these two. Tiferet, the third one, is a balance of these two. In any one emotion that you emote, when you said earlier anger, for example, that means a balance of chesed and gevura in that moment in your subjective case. It may not be right, it may be very right, but that's what happens. Any time you actually emote, there has been a balance. Not necessarily a correct balance, but chesed and gevura have come together in that particular balance, in that moment. That's called tiferet. Once you have an emotion, human beings tend to want to share emotions because one of the features of being a human being is our wish to reach a state of oneness, which was the primordial state before we came into being. So all our life we spend connecting with each other, connecting with the animal world, connecting with the vegetation world, connecting with the inanimate world. Echad, achdut, oneness. That's what we seek. Netzach is the way that we cross the interpersonal boundary. I want to touch you verbally. I need to express to you. I want to share myself with you. That's the netzach tendency of wanting to be outside of oneself but be part of someone else. On the other hand, hod, the next one after that, if I do this dominantly, controllingly, leaving you no space, we're not going to have any relationship. So I need to hold back at the same time, giving you space so that the relationship can mature. When I reach that ideal balance of those two, it becomes yesod. So I speak, to give an example, only this much, giving you space to speak that much, and then we can start getting closer and closer and closer. And then, as a consequence of all those, you have the end result, the product, which is called malchut. It manifests. Okay, it's complex, but then we're complex. I know we'd like to reduce ourselves to simplicities, but human beings are very, very complex creatures. The world is very complex. I mean, analyze it scientifically, it's hugely complex. And spiritually is the antecedent for the physical, and therefore it's even more complex than that. So if you want to understand, there are complexities. This is still very simplistic. So we now have 3 processes of mind, 7 of emotion. Now let's get to the final step before we get to an understanding of spiritual and emotional intelligence. The body. What is the body? We've spoken a lot about the spiritual, the emotional, mind aspects, the abstracts. The body is the vehicle for the soul in the world of time and space. The soul flows in and out. It's called Ratzu Vashov. It flows in and out of the body, gradually loosening its connection. That's the process called entropy. Let me explain. If I can put a simple storyline, the soul is out there, connected to the Ein Sof, infinity, Godhead. God says, you can't be with me. You have to go down there. Why do I have to go down there, says the soul? Because that's what I want. You can't ask God why God wants. It's just an impossible question philosophically. Okay, I'll go down there. I go down there and I find a body. Which body? God, give me a body. That one there, that's yours. Right? I go into that body. It feels very uncomfortable. I mean, I really want to achieve, and this body is stopping me. In fact, this body is making me think all sorts of weird things, and it's making me feel all sorts of emotions that I don't feel comfortable with and the like. And am I fulfilled? Am I happy? I really questing. What am I really questing for? It's very hard to be in a body. So the soul constantly wants to get out of body. So God says, I'll give you a little bit of reprieve. It's called sleep. Every night, you'll jump a little bit out of the body, and you'll get a tutorial once again, which is why you behave rather strangely when you are asleep, sort of almost like dead, except you're breathing, but you're not doing all the active things because there's not a full integration of soul in body. Okay? Gets its tutorial, and then is instructed, wake up time, back in. Now, this happens not just in sleep. It happens in life. And life, it spirals down. There's a constant toing and froing. That's called Ratzu Vashov in our literature. And what happens is this spiraling down, down and down, until there's no longer a will of the soul to be in the body, at which point death takes place. This has physical manifestations, the laws of entropy in physics, or we get ill, we get sick, which means malfunction of the body. What's malfunction of the body? Soul isn't fully integrated there. Health is total integration. That's why health and wellness is an absolute mitzvah. Why is it an absolute mitzvah? Because unless you have body health, you don't have optimal expression of the soul. Optimal expression of the soul isn't just in terms of body health, it's in mental health and emotional health as well, which comes through the organs of the body. And that's why you really have to keep fit. And there has to be mind fit, emotion fit, and body fit. But particularly body fit, and that's where food comes into it so profoundly today because of the problems we have developed in the last 60, 70 years of food production, which we've never had in the whole history of the world. Toxicity, mixtures, additives like preservatives, colouring and the like, which are not meant for the body. And the body fails. Maybe we have cancers, which we didn't have once upon a time, and other shortcomings. And we're becoming such an immobile society, whereas human beings were meant to be moving creatures. Movement is the centre of creation. Everything's in a state of motion. Nothing is still. There's no such thing as absolute stillness. No such thing as absolute stillness. You'll never find stillness anywhere. There's no such thing as stillness. That chair that you're seated on feels still. Put it under an electron microscope and you see it's a whirling dervish dance of molecules in a constant state of motion. Nothing is still. The reason why there's a chair there is because there are forces keeping things in tension that are constantly in a state of motion. Nothing is still. We're meant to be moving. And when we stop moving to the extent that we should, then the soul doesn't flow ideally through it and we become unwell. That's another discussion, but very, very important discussion. Okay, so we've got this idea of the body. Now, I'm going to give you a little statement which I'm not going to elaborate on. You think that the soul is the paramount feature of our life and the body's merely a vehicle, right? It sounds like that. In Hasidic teachings of Kabbalah, we learn that the body comes from a higher spiritual source than the soul. Not going to elaborate. But that's all the more reason to take really good care of the body. Now we're getting to our subject. Now that we've got a little bit of information under our belt, have a look at this. A vertical axis which separates AM from PM, meaning before and after. a horizontal axis that separates seichel, mind, from midos, emotion. 2 axes. 4 quadrants, 1, 2, 3, 4. Quadrant 1, the feelings that you bring to the fore in any given situation, the response to a situation. Second, the thinking that follows immediately those feelings, to rationalize and understand a situation, to rationalize and understand your feelings. I'm going to stop there for a moment before I get to 3 and 4. What I've just described is every one of our responses to all life settings. When something occurs, someone says something to you that you don't like, someone offends you, someone screams and yells at you, how do you respond? Well, not you, because you're a very spiritual audience and you always respond ideally and appropriately. But out there in the world, when people are screamed at, when they're yelled at, they generally act like monkeys. They copy. Oh, you're yelling, my cue line, and you yell back. Okay? Why do they do that? I mean, it's really totally irrational. You know full well that if you yell back at them, it doesn't help. Quite the contrary. Generally speaking, it spirals upwards, not downwards. And anger is not particularly good for you. We have clear statistics that show that habitually angry people have a higher statistical incidence of ill health. So you being rational human beings know that to be angry is ridiculous, and yet human beings tend to be angry. And that's the product. The product is our geopolitical world which we live in. So you have this feeling, and then, of course, you have the response thinking. You know why you get angry? Because you say, how dare you speak to me like that? Who do you think you are? What chutzpah? I am going to show you what I am. I am going to... So the thinking process rationalizes the feeling process. By and large, all family disputes remain for generations there because of this 1-2 punch. Feelings get there, and you rationalize those feelings, support them. See, what's happened is like this. Emotions, we now know, are much 3 times as fast in the way that they filter to your consciousness than is mind. Isn't that interesting? The neurotransmitters flow 3 times as fast for emotional reactions as they do for mind interpretations. You feel 3 to 4 times as fast as you think. Right? It's just natural. Yeah, it's natural to be 3 to 4 times as fast with feelings than thinking, which is why you're always saying sorry. The feelings get there, they create a beachhead, and the Johnny-come-lately of mind tries to catch up, but is taken prisoner by the feelings. What happens when mind is taken prisoner by the feelings? We call that rationalization. That's the English word. We rationalize our feelings. Of course you shouldn't speak to me like that. That's why I have to prove to you that I am somebody. How dare you? Therein madness lies. Because if you stay at 1 and 2, the AM 2 quadrants before, see what's coming after in a moment, you will never have any satisfaction in life. You'll always find yourself difficulties in relationships. You'll always find yourself in a state of unhappiness, and life will be a burden. And that's for the majority of people. Why? Because most people are not emotionally intelligent. I haven't defined those terms yet. So we move to quadrant 3. Quadrant 3 is we change our interpretation. The mind stops being prisoner of the heart and recogitates, reinterprets the situation, changing the feelings. It's no longer a prisoner, but the master. And as a consequence, your feelings change. The result of changed feelings is changed behavior. You speak differently. You say different things. So, instead of, how dare you speak to me like that? Who do you think you are? Rather, it is, you're yelling and screaming. That means you're in pain. Because people don't yell and scream unless there's physical or emotional pain. What can I do to help you? Now, don't say use those words, to which anyone will say, but hold on, that doesn't work, does it? But I'm not asking it to work. I'm talking about what's happening inside you. In a moment, we'll see what happens in the world. I'm talking about a paradigm shift of your interpretation. I'm talking about your self-talk, not your verbal talk to the other. I'm talking about a new attitudinal response that takes place inside of you. Instead of anger building up, how dare you, inside of you, I'm asking you to move to a position of compassion. Oh, but isn't that the Buddhists own that word? No, no, no. We Jewish people also have chesed. In other words, what I'm saying to you is, rather than the egotistic, self-centered approach of anger, because anger is always about self, anger is all about control, anger is all about exercise of power, reinterpret, and instead of anger, allow your feeling to be one of compassion. For it to be one of compassion, you have to reinterpret. They're not a threat. They're someone who God has placed me in this moment because God wants me to be their best therapist right now, to assist them, whatever might be the case. Remember, I'm not saying the words that you enunciate. I'm talking about what your attitude and response is. And then I'll come into a moment to give you a sense of what happens between emotion and mind in that moment, what's happening between Chochmah, Bin, and Das, and Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferes, the other four. Yes?
What about in an instance when they are a threat? Because obviously that emotional response comes from the feeling.
In the very rare instance, I could ask you a personal question if you want to answer. How many times in your life has your life been threatened? Okay, don't have to answer. Everyone can answer that question. It's very rare. And it's true, in those instances, you need to summons up other features, which I'm not discussing. But anger is never one of them. Anger is a no-no in Jewish spiritual teachings under all circumstances. Anger is not legitimate, positive emotion. Never, ever, ever. Of course, you need to have strength. You need to defend. The most potent army in Jewish history was the army of David HaMelech, King David. Every soldier was taught never to be angry in the heat of battle. It gets in the way. As I've mentioned to some of you, 2 of my sons served in the Israeli army. Both were officers. Both served 5 years. They trained every one of their platoon members, and in one instance company members, never to get angry. A good sports coach will always instruct his or her players, don't get angry, it'll interfere with your efficacy of winning. Anger doesn't help. You need to have strength, you need to have motivation, you need to have skill, but you have to have mind, not emotion. Both, but mind, as you'll see in a moment, I'm getting there, has to rule the emotion in those moments. So I'm talking about the 95th percentile of our lives, which, thank God, are not life-threatening. They're the instances I'm really talking about. In those instances, you have to apply this principle. They're yelling and screaming. They're being horrible to me. That means they have the problem. Now, you can walk away from it, as most people will say. That's fine. But the Jewish imperative is not to walk away ever, but to help. Now, there were a few questions there. I've managed to provoke a few people, okay, to get you angry. 1, 2. Okay, we'll start with those 2. Yes.
I was going to ask, what if you are the cause of that person being angry and losing their temper?
Then apologise. Be compassionate, be considerate. You've done the wrong thing. Eat humble pie. Practice anivut, humility, and say, you're right. But don't get angry.
Where does guilt come in? Because guilt,
Where does what? Guilt?
the feeling of guilt.
That sounds very Jewish.
Yeah, exactly. Often the response isn't to, if you kind of have an emotional outburst of anger, sometimes the response isn't to rationalise it.
No,
It's to say,
absolutely. I understand.
But isn't guilt also a
Yeah.
negative emotion?
Why I ask? Because sometimes people say, where does guilt come into it? All right. All right. Guilt is not a useful emotion at all. In fact, it's not really an emotion, it's a complexity, but nevertheless we'll call it an emotion. Guilt makes no sense whatsoever. Guilt only destroys, it only eats up. Where does it come into it? Bad management of emotions. That produces guilt. Let me get to my statement now, which will help us understand that and help understand the two words at the top. What I'm teaching here is all based on one phrase of the Alter Rebbe in a work known as the Book of Tanya. And that phrase is Moach Shalit al Halev, which means, in translation, the mind must dictate the outcomes of the emotions. The mind must dictate the outcomes of the emotions, which sounds harsh as it's first said. Because whenever I say that, then automatically I says, but hold on, do I need to imprison my feelings? Can't I be spontaneous? Where is the joie de vivre of life then? Listen, when we say mind dictates the outcomes of the feelings, what we're saying is this. Chochmah, Binah, and Da'at provide rationality. Mind is compass. What's the compass bearing that I need to take this ship on? To have that capacity then to flow on that course, I need energy. I need fuel, emotion. Emotion fuels me. But the mind provides the compass bearing. It's not whether one is more important than the other. You need both. But it's no use having all this fuel that you're burning up if you're traveling in the wrong direction. So what happens is, for many people who are wounded in life, well, we're all wounded emotionally to some extent in life, and life is a process of trying to work it through and correct it. We need to start again from pristine first principles. And for example, if a person, sometimes I find an individual who finds himself or herself difficult to share emotions, will always hold emotions in. Why? Inevitably, it's often because at some formative childhood stage of life, the emotions were very badly battered, and therefore they become very, very unconfident of their feelings, and therefore hide them. So you have to go back to beginnings. You create safety in feelings. The first rule of safety in feeling is get the compass bearing correct. This is appropriate. Practice speaking this. Practice saying that in these settings. Then allow the emotions to flow. It's artificial initially, but you're rewiring. You're reorienting. You're starting again until in several months, God willing, it becomes natural then. A new natural default where you automatically get much more wisdom in your compass bearing and therefore feel much more confident that you can emote in that direction. Moach shalit al halev. The mind has to provide the compass bearing for the feelings to be able to flow appropriately. In other words, emotional intelligence. What does it mean, emotionally unintelligent? It means still very emotional, but wrong compass bearing. Rowan?
Question about connection of emotional intelligence to soul.
Yeah, we're talking emotional intelligence already at 3 or 4 levels removed from the pristine soul. When we talk about emotional intelligence, we're talking already about the soul through the body, through the brain, through the heart, etc. We're working at the coal face of the world. We're already much earlier. Of course, all is the soul's expression. But when the soul expresses through here, and the soul expresses through here, at different rates, different paces, different backgrounds, different settings, you've got different kinds of balances. And some of them we like, and some of them we don't like. We are able to retrain ourselves, is what we're saying. All right, it's a little bit of a complex model, but as I said before, complexity is part of it. But all I'm trying to show here is that there's a methodology that you can actually retrain the way you think and feel and put it back together differently if you wish.
I was thinking it's a good idea in theory for your mind to, when you have an emotion, like to stop for a minute and just not respond right away. But sometimes I think anger could be better than, sometimes it could turn into sad or to like something more despondent. It's harder to express express yourself when it's something that's, sadness is almost like dead and anger is like a fire. It's more like, I think it's easier to express yourself in a way when you're angry than when you're sad.
Yeah, I mean, you've made the automatic shift from anger to sadness, which doesn't necessarily take place, but let's assume it for your discussion. People come to me and say, Laibl, I've got all this stuff inside of me. I've got to get it out. It's making me really angry. So I say, yeah, I understand that. Tell me about this stuff. What's the colour? What's the size? Where can you find it? What's the matter? Why can't you answer me those questions? I mean, it's stuff, but where is the stuff? There is no stuff. There's no such thing as stuff. It's a phantom that psychology has evolved in its colloquial way that says you've got to get it out. 3 generations of psychologists have said you've got to get it out because if you don't get it out, it'll cause untold damage within, splatter you on the walls of your house and whatever. And you know what? If you believe, and I'm not going to go there, what belief is. If you believe that you've got stuff, you'll behave, according to that phantom, you'll behave as if you need to get it out. You create it. Okay? On Tuesday when I speak mindfulness, I'll be talking about placebo and nocebo, which is part of this discussion. But if you have a different model as to what it is that makes you function, no longer stuff, no longer I've got this in me, I've got to get it out, because there's nothing in you that you need to get out. In fact, you have a different model. It's a mechanical model. It's gears. I can give you a different set of visuals. Then your whole belief system takes place, and you don't have any longer any phantom of stuff. And you don't move into sadness or negativity, because that's what you believe must be the logical process, because 3 generations of psychologists have told you that, so you believe that. You don't have to go there. You really don't have to go there. I know I'm offending a lot of psychologists in the room. Forgive me. Yes. 1, 2. Sorry.
So are you saying that acceptance is...
The word acceptance is used a lot, and I don't like that word either. Acceptance more or less says, okay, fatalism. I accept my fate. Never accept your fate, because fate is never there. You're always evolving it and changing it. You've got free choice. You've got bechira chavshis. Acknowledgement, I would agree with. You acknowledge a set of circumstances and change them if you wish. I don't like the word acceptance. It's too passive.
I found it interesting that you regarded creativity and intuition as aspects of the mind, because it kind of puts a different spin on the idea of running emotion through the mind. Doesn't mean it has to be analytical or systematic. It means...
You've picked up on a very important point. In our teachings, emotion and mind are 2 very separate manifestations of consciousness. In the Western thinking, they're all intertwined and often the one. They always talk about feelings and emotions as part of the mind, and sort of, it's like a big cholent. Conclusion. There's the phrase, Moach shalit al halev, and to lead a deep and meaningful life means you need to have your emotional self operating according to the truths of your spiritual self. The formative discussion that we had was understanding the spiritual elements that flow through the organs of the body. Once they flow through the 2 primary organs of mind, of brain and heart, they become mind and emotion. Mind and emotion are 2 separate consciousness flows. But we have a higher self, which I haven't alluded to, it's within our soul, that is able to view our emotion, view our mind, and alter its balance, change its direction, change its intensity, reorient. And that was quadrants 3 and 4. In order to become a mature human being as opposed to an immature human beings operate in quadrants 1 and 2 back there. In other words, emotions will always dominate their mind. Most human beings, unfortunately, that's the way they operate. The way they feel becomes the way they think. And because feelings don't possess wisdom, only mind possesses wisdom, they'll always be immature. Why do we have bar and bat mitzvah? Bar and bat mitzvah, 12 and 13, are the years when the brain completes its primary growth. At that point, the neshama, the soul, can flow optimally through the brain. Responsibility then takes place. Well, not in our society, but once upon a time. And therefore, at that point, responsibility is left with the child, the adult, in former times. And therefore, that intelligence test takes place then. Emotional intelligence is mind and emotion. Spiritual intelligence means to recognize humbly the underpinnings to what mind and emotion and what they're all about. Any further questions? Yes.
In that transformation, when you actually step back and understand that that person is in pain,
Yes.
and then you don't get angry back at that person, you understand the person is
Yes.
in pain, and you said it's basically our job to help.
Yes.
How do you help?
Can't give an answer because it depends on each
Because
circumstance.
This person, okay, gets angry,
Yes.
gets angry with you or gets angry with the situation.
You don't have to be successful. This has to be your attitude. It may not be successful, but who says that we have to be successful? The person is angry, and whatever I say may not assist. Maybe silence is better. Whatever might be your judgment call and wisdom in the moment, that's fine. I'm talking about your attitudinal response, what's happening in your balance of mind and emotion, not whether you're successful or not. Maybe it requires 99 monkeys to do that, and only the 100th monkey will make it work. You don't know. You just have to be humble to know we're one of the monkeys in the process, that's all. It's our attitude.
Yeah, I understand, but what I'm saying is it's not necessarily of any use to the person in front of you because they,
How do you know?
not immediately anyway.
No, that's because we're not humble enough. As I said, it may not be you. It may be someone 3 people down the track in another setting, but because you played your role somewhere 3 times down the track, they finally get it. You have to play your part. You don't have to see the result. That's egotistic. I want to see the result.
What if they really do have a problem with something you've done and it's not a problem that they have? Then
Yeah, if it's a problem that you can't handle, there's no reason not to be compassionate. You can be advisory. And if they accept, they accept. If they don't, they don't. I'm talking about what happens inside you. I'm not talking about how successful you are vis-a-vis them.
what if they're really angry at you, but it's not something that they're angry with in their own life? They get angry at you and that's why they're yelling at you, then do you have to, then how can you have this attitude of how can I help them?
Why not? Why is it hard to feel compassion for a person? Just because they've raised their voice? So they've got stretching their vocal cords. Big deal.
What if they're angry at you when you don't agree with it?
Well, that's all the more reason to feel compassionate. They're angry with you when they don't agree with you. They don't have any sensibility as to how to hold a discussion with you. I feel really sorry for them. So help them. You keep your cool. You speak quietly to them. Modeling is the most powerful influence in the world. It's how you comport yourself that ultimately affects people and the world. Not what you say, how you behave. We'll make this the last question. And second last question.
What about hurt?
About? Hurt.
Somebody says something to you and it's hurtful. How do you react?
Can you excuse me if I'm rather harsh? A lot of such hurt is expression of ego. I am being hurt. If you're compassionate, it's that way. If you're being hurt, it's this way. I understand. I mean, we're not super people. We can't always be oblivious to it. But we can be aware that we're being hurt and we can recognize that we have to compensate for that.
I wanted to ask about Stephen Hawking. His body was completely destroyed, but he still managed to do things and he used
Because his soul flows through the brain adequately. The soul doesn't flow adequately through Hawking's body, and hence the body is paralyzed, etc. and therefore the body's not functional in that extent. But thank God, his brain as an anatomical item of creation works very well. His soul can never be hurt. Souls can't be hurt. Souls can't be damaged. And therefore the soul operates ideally through the brain. Hence, he's a great brain. All right, I know that we've raised a lot of questions, and the purpose of my discussion this evening wasn't to necessarily satisfy. My purpose was to raise issues, but more than anything, I wanted to demonstrate to you there is a Jewish spiritual set of teachings that can help to respond to life circumstances in the same way that many other parallel systems of thought, whether they be psychological, the other spiritual, whatever they might be, also respond. But there's also an ancient teaching that we have in our backyard, and therefore, please don't go to the Himalayas. You'll find it in your backyard. Stay there. Good night.